Again, thanks for coming out this morning. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Frankie Poplau, CEO and founder of Millennial Incorporated, teacher, CFO, superintendent, and last but not least, accomplished speaker and writer. Also like to thank Tracy, Mayor Mahold, and Ann McCullen for organizing this fun event today. So please help me welcome Dr. Frankie Poplau.
Thanks for coming out today. You know, as I got up this morning and thought, oh, it's so gloomy today and so rainy, but then driving over, green. It's turning green everywhere, so I'm all happy. It doesn't take much to make me happy. Today we're talking about the various generations, and I guarantee you there'll be some surprises. There'll be some things where you'll want to disagree. And so I want you to keep in mind that this is a talk around generalizations. It's about trends. It's about norms. It's not a true definitive understanding of the complexity of an individual. When you talk about understanding the people in your life, you need much more than just which generation they're from. Each person is made up of their psychological makeup. We have the Myers-Briggs for that, and a host of other things. Their brain functionality, the cognitive. You know, what is their brain style? And there's decades of research on that. You've got their personal story, the things that happen to them. Your personal story of things that happen to you, how you respond to those things and decisions that you make. This all helps shape. And then there's the social cultural, which is, it gets as minute as your place in family. There's your theological and philosophical aspect, which is your guidance system. And these all come together in a very complex way to create an individual. And it's continually evolving. And so I have a lot to say today that will be of value, and you'll be able to use it. And I guarantee you walk out of here with a couple of things that it'll alter how you see things, and it'll create some supper time conversation, I guarantee it. But it is not a definitive. It does not become, you know, your Bible of, okay, now I have you all figured out kind of thing. Good luck with that. And especially since many of you are interacting with teenagers. And the whole developmental brain research around that, I could talk for another day. So we're talking about the generations, and these are the ones. And the first surprise you may get for the day is you came, many of you thinking that you were the parents of millennials. But a lot of you are actually the parents of Zs. The current high school are Zs. That's the new generation. It's not in your face commercially. There's a ton of research. There's a ton that's been done with it coming out of social anthropology and psychology. But it is not a readily familiar term yet. Sometimes you'll see them in literature called the 15th generation, just like the Xers are also the 13th generation. I've never actually done the math back to find out who qualified as the first generation, but there must be some anthropological thing around that. So the Zs are there, but oftentimes, you know, there's many different people you interact with and siblings in a family. Oftentimes we are raising two generations at one time with siblings. Just want to give you a moment to ponder those, figure out who in your life fits. Yeah?
Just a question. I work with some of this stuff in my professional career. Did the Ys fall off?
I'll talk about that when I get to it, but I mush them together because actually the X's and Y's were given such small criteria in terms of years that it's kind of understood that there's not a distinguish between them, and it worked best to mush them together. So it encompasses all of them. And even when you mush them together, they only get 15 years. So they're one of the smaller spans of time. And you'll see these dates. I mean, these dates are not cast in stone. You'll see these dates in different publications off by 2 years or so differently, but roughly a generation is 15 to 20 years. And a generation is raised by the previous two. the previous two generations. Every generation rebels against the previous generation. They're going to discover the problems that they created and fix them. There's a natural cycle. And that cycle looks something like this. And what's really interesting today is that with the length of life, with long life, we are experiencing all the generations, and the cycle actually is repeating. And you'll find, if you really get into this, there's argument about how this cycle looks. Is this cycle predictive, or is it a reactive cycle that looks a little differently? If you look at it far enough, it's a court and heart. It's a the horse and the cart kind of conversation. Ultimately, because we react to the previous generations, and then generations kind of evolve naturally off of, there is a cycle to it. And so you'll see that even though the traditionalists are now the aged in our population, that the high schoolers actually are like them. And in many, many, many ways, the same words get used. So you'll see that the key components are about how a generation reacts to what's going on and how strong they value community versus valuing individual. Those are the key components, and that's what evolves over time with this. Because we have the long life and there's all these generations, especially the Xers and the Boomers are feeling tremendously squeezed, because we're having to relate and respond to the generations before us, and we are naturally, due to our generational guide, we're very responsive to the generations after us, and it's spreading us thin. It's spreading us very thin. So you'll hear the sandwich generation. It encompasses both the Boomers and the Xers. Every generation, now there's many, many ways to look at generations, but these are the primary ones that are looked at, and that I will be talking about as I go forward to some extent, jumping around trying to grab the most important things, because I could talk to you for a long time about each of them. I'll try and focus mostly on the last generations, the ones, the Xers, the Millennials, and the Zs, but you'll get the idea. Traditionalists. They're the aged population at this time. The words that define them would be dedicated and loyal. They did not want to challenge the status quo. They believed in working within the system. Their motto would be, go along to get along. The idea of work was that loyalty, the company man, and it was the company man. Women did not traditionally work in that generation. And they tended to go into a job young and stay working for that company till retirement. And that drove them. In this generation, the strong institutions and then weaker individuals. You'll see that the stories of their time were hero men, flawed but strong, and loyal women. And they really supported and grew institutions. So I put up there the PTA, NASA, a lot of the companies were formed. It's sometimes called the Great Generation or the Silent Generation because they were anonymous, head down, do your work, make no waves, but at the same time they were the richest. All the companies got formed. When you think about the age of technology and computers, oftentimes people think of Bill Gates and the Boomers. Boomers didn't really create much of anything. I hate to say it. But this is the generation that started the companies and created the computers and basically built all the technological foundation upon which the Boomers started using and expanding. Boomers. The stressor, when I go back to the traditionalists, one thing I should point out is every generation also has their stressors. The stressors of the traditionalist generation were the boomer children. And that really was their biggest stressor. And they grew up, here's the interesting thing, and I'll point it out now, is that they grew up with parents that had dealt with World War and the Great Depression. And so that kind of formed how they viewed career and work, and they didn't have that real sense of security. Security was really valued to them. The Zs of today are coming out of terrorism and the Great Recession. And so the Millennials and the Zs, but more so the Zs, have this same kind of feel towards career and future. Boomers, the stories of their time, which is kind of fun to think about, is their strong men became superhuman. They weren't flawed. They were superhuman. And that became very much the identification of children in the stories of the time is an interesting study. In traditionalists, the children were, if you look, the children were portrayed as poor and needy, kind of suffering, when you think of Spanky and Our Game. The children in this era were a little, they started becoming a little bit more devilish. They got into mischief, they were trouble, but they really needed the parent, the adult figures to guide them and bring them back into way. And as we go through this, pay attention to that. The portrayal of children in the stories of their time has dramatically changed. Dramatically changed, and it really does. This was the first generation where they faced some fears. I mean, we were doing, at the beginning of the generation, the hide under the desk for a nuclear bomb stuff, but also throughout the generation ended up with missing children on milk cartons. And so there was this underlying fear thing that was happening for children really young. Really young. And consequently, this was the group that started the rebellion. They're very rebellious. Unfortunately, we are very rebellious. And what you'll see, and this carried through from the time we were young till current times. And it's okay as I speak to start overlaying current politics because it's just fascinating. It's fascinating. But what boomers do best from young on is run around, point at things, and say, look, see that? See how bad it is? See? And that's it. We don't actually fix anything. We just run around and point. We did protests, we made our voices very loud, pointing at the problems with status quo. This generation, as you'll see, doesn't have a lot of companies and products. Sad to say, the greatest invention of the boomer era in our youth was salad bars. But we are adventuresome, and we did get conversation going. And during the time of the boomers, the advancement in the concept of women and what women could do with their lives grew more than in any other generation. It did not grow a foundation until subsequent generations. But our generation did elevate the opportunities for women. The boomer generation also opened the conversation of civil rights and moved society. So no, we were not about products and companies and technology and that kind of advancement as a whole, but we were about social change and stirring the pot. And we did it well, and we still do. We also are the largest population. We were a bubble. The population of boomers was a gigantic bubble, so they often talk about it as the large mouse going through the skinny snake. And therefore our stressors were a lot of competition. It was always, there were never enough of everything for this big group. We were in large class sizes all the way through school. We were crammed into crowded school buildings. But at the same time, we carried a tremendous amount of influence. Consumerism tends to bend towards the boomers. But that, like everything, passes in time. Actually, the Millennials have now beat us. There's more Millennials than there are Boomers. And the consumer thing has changed, and it's gradually moving. And so it isn't that. Darn it, I was so looking forward to the neck to ankle swimsuits. But no, instead, thank you, Michelle Obama, no dresses have sleeves anymore. When you look at this era, you can see divorce really entered our world, and society hadn't reacted to it yet. There were more single-parent families, and this all started evolving with the increase in divorce during the Boomer era, and yet we had not adjusted, and the kids paid the price, and that would be the Xers. So the Xers introduced the concept of the latchkey kid. That's a big definition of their childhood. They could not depend on the adults to be there. And so the Xers, the stories of their time, were about when faced, they're strongly, fiercely independent. They're the Mavericks. They go out and do their own thing. They need no one. Need absolutely no one. They're very independent. So in this era, individualism got really strong and institutions dropped. Because institutions are what was falling apart. Everything that the traditionalists had touted and the Boomers were at least pointing at started crumbling in their eyes. Family, marriage, the church scandal, Bill Clinton, the presidency. I mean, far cry from the concept of the Camelot years of Kennedy. And their trust level for the adult world and the institutional world fell off. And they knew that they needed to make it by standing on their own. But like with anything, there's challenges and there's troubles, and so they also were an era of very, very adaptable. And this includes many of you in this room. Very adaptable group. But when they need help, the Xers come together as a group with their peers, and they morph. And consequently, the stories of their time were the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Transformers. It was all about peers and morphing and adapting. The stories of this time were really about friends over family and strong independence. It also was an era of shock value humor that started. Shock value humor. There were not a lot of boundaries, and the number one value was work-life balance. So there was a point when Xers were, I share this right, there was a point when Xers were first entering the workforce. And at that time I was superintendent of schools. And I was negotiating teacher contracts. And I'm sitting in a room negotiating changes in language and contract with the union leaders. And the union leaders were of what generations do you think? They were all traditionalists and the beginning part of Boomer. We were in a rapidly growing district where we had hired, we're hiring lots and lots of teachers every year. So if you went out and looked at the average age of the teachers, most of them, a great majority of them, were Xers. They were screaming for work-life balance. Number of work days, number of time off, all kinds of things that would reduce the stress. Traditionalists are head down, go along, get along, pay me my wage. Boomers are all about pay your dues. It's reward at the end. If I come and I do a good job every day for years and years and years, I will get the corner office, I will get the promotion, and I will get the pension. And I don't worry so much about today. And now you've got the Xers who are, it's all about today. I want to change and I want it now. And it's not about money, it's about balance. It was interesting times because it was and it was all about this generation, and now all of a sudden we had multiple generations in the workplace. And that's when it first started getting researched and written about, more so. This is the generation of the genius individual. So institutions weren't strong, but you had genius in it. Look at that. It's all of that technology was launched in the dorm rooms of your friends. It was an amazing time. And the supersize me, sometimes it's called the me generation. It was a supersize. So everything became big. Big houses, big cars. This was the era of the Hummers. And it was a lot of young extras that built really, really big homes and then had no furniture in them. And now, you'll see that in real estate. Now they're facing that because there's all of these very, very large homes, and this large population of boomers are downsizing. And you'll just see how that plays out over time. Generation X, boomers will relate to because of the stress of the squeeze, but you're really squeezed. You've got this big, you're sometimes often called the middle child of the generations because the boomers ahead of you are so big and so influential, and they don't get out of the way easily and allow you to grab your place in history. And yet, you've got generations behind you, as I speak to them, that are much more self-absorbed, self-entitled, very confident, who just feel as equals. And so you're feeling that push. Trying to hold your jobs against these young punks who come in and think that they could do your job better. While you can't make advancement because of the people above you that just won't get out of the way. And so the stressors of this generation are really about responding to all of the trying to find your voice, trying to get attention, and not be declared the slacker generation. Because that is not who you are, but it is what you've been labeled. You're also the helicopter parents. Took a while, but the psychologist did name it. You became the helicopter parents. There, in the end of the boomers and the Xer generation, there have been more child safety laws written than in all of history combined. And it showed. It showed. You define yourself by parenting. And in fact, it's the first time parenting became a verb. Traditionalists, they didn't parent. They just set the rules and that was it. Boomers, it was a different kind of parenting time. But it wasn't an engaged in the word parenting. We did not define ourselves by being parents at all, and probably didn't give it as much thought as it would have been good for the kids. The Xers rebelled against that and got hyper engaged and very protective. And now what we're talking about is the parenting style of the Xers, which impacted the life of the Millennials and also the Zs. Very scheduled. Very competitive, very suburban. It impacted schools big time. And it impacted education policy. It was the era of, boom, standardized tests, and documentation, and achievement. And so we have the Millennials. The stressors for Millennials is student debt. It's getting a career launched. It's the difference between what they were told as they were being raised and the reality they're facing in the world. And breaking free of their helicopter parents is a stress. Because they also are team-oriented. They watch out for family in a team kind of way. And breaking free, they're conflicted in that way. The most conflicted generation probably was the boomers. We were in an era where it was all about Donna Reed and the loyal, take care of your kids home, and the I am woman, hear me roar. We had a lot of conflicting with the future and the past and the evolution because we were stirring the pot and then had to live in that mess. This generation is conflicted by their own values. How to grow independently while valuing team and family. But they actually were told, they feel very affirmed. They feel like they're trophy children. They have high expectations for themselves. They expect accolades. Like day one, first new job. Tell me how wonderful I am and it's already 10:30 and no one's told me. But they have no confidence. The competition has been their whole life that they absolutely fear failure continually. So mom, come to my job interview with me, please. That's an exaggeration, but there's a lot more involvement between parents and millennials in adult activity because they don't have that strong independence, that strong confidence. And then they hit the student debt and the Great Recession and the job market that just isn't there for them, and the millennials are moving home at a time when they're fighting for developing that individuality at a rapid pace. The stories of their time, children now, if I look back, I don't think I did that here. In the story of the time back here, it doesn't really show it there, but the children gradually became where the kids were very mischievous, but the adults were stupid. So if you think Saving the Bell, how dumb was the principal of that high school, really? Parents and authority figures became comical, and the kids were just plain mischievous and immature. Now you get to this generation, and the kids are awesome. They're awesome. And all of a sudden, the kids are solving the problems for the adults. And they are super kids. And that was their perception. But they valued education. Really, they knew that school was important. And they also were growing in an era of huge technology. And there was all this stuff in the air, magical almost. And that was Harry Potter. Harry Potter was all about school and magic. It was the era of animation. The inbred stories that come in Pixar and the young stories. If you want to know, it's really interesting because who creates the stories for youth? It's the previous generations. And yet, the stories are always predictive of where the generation is going. So it's almost subconscious that we know the problems that need to be solved coming up, and we start embedding them into the stories of the time for youth. And this was all about problem solving. It was all about creative problem solving. Think of Toy Story and what those toys had to do in the night. And all of the animation. There was a real expectation that they would face a world where it looked for them just like it did for Mark Zuckerberg. They were all expecting that to happen, and instead now they relate to Hannah. And so that's, when you think of millennials, keep a lot of this in mind. They are very group-oriented, and the parenting, I think that's my next one, the millennial parenting shows exactly who they are. The social media use of millennials is different. It's just significant. Sure, they'll call previous generations and ask for, we'll talk about things, but in the most, millennials are about opinion research. Strong opinion research. And so there's the blogs, and it's inundated with reviews of things and mommy blogs, and the social media is where they get their information. And it is a lot from their peers. And it's because they're all about team. They get the concept of crowdsourcing. They get the concept of all of this. And what's changed is they have very, very strong opinions. They're strong opinions. But they're not confident in them. If you know of any young millennial moms, they worry about every decision they make, and a decision can take 3 days. And they cannot make a decision without their phone. Yet, all decisions that people make are valued. They are not real judgmental. So where it talks about you can parent however you wish, I am confident this is where I stand, but I'm okay with where you stand. But let's share. How's it working for you? That's really defines this generation. This was a generation where computers were about games and homework. And their phones became something that they could text, and they can do instant message. And computer storage moved so that you could store on DVDs. So the amount of storage got bigger. They also were a generation that identified portable technology, iPods, and playlists. And the most significant change in the previous 2 generations that are defining our world is the concept of playlists. Because now the world, at your fingertips, is modified to your wants, your needs, and your styles. And it is not necessarily, and this is where the Z's come in, they go beyond playlists too, and it's not even going to be defined by the big corporate world that sets up the access. If we don't like what they're producing for us, we'll just produce our own. And this all started with the iPod. And being a little bit of a visionary, it's part of my brain. The minute I had a kid that showed me an iPod and what it could do, thank God I went and bought some Apple stock. Which isn't doing so great right now, but I could see it. It changed the world. And the world, even since then, has not responded in all of its institutions to that concept of playlists and individualization and choice. And that genie will never go back in the bottle. Here's the Z's. Here's where children, the stories of their time are interesting. It's all about solving big world problems. All of them. Every single one of them. And what's the biggest world problem that they're dealing with? The environment. That's their big thing. But mostly, their heroes are about getting out there and solving and fixing systemic problems. And it's all wonderful, like WALL-E and Happy Feet, but it also isn't so wonderful, like kids being massacred in Hunger Games. But if you really look at the metaphor of Hunger Games is all about politics and labels and inequality. Another one besides Hunger Games would be Divergent. It's all about that, and they're saying no. Our number one value, the millennials, the number one value is team and fair. The Z's, the number one value is equal. Equal. We are all sharing this world. We are all sharing this school. We are all sharing this home that we live in. Therefore, we all have voice, we all have influence, and we are all equal. When you say, because I'm the mom or I'm the dad and this is why, they can't even relate that. You might as well have just spoken Greek. That doesn't relate. They don't get it because the world is equal. And so the stories of their time are around that, around the kids. But you want to know what's happened with kids in that story of their time? The parents, adults, they've disappeared. Not adults. Up had an adult in it, but one of the things about the Z's that's really cool is they value multi-generational interaction more than any previous generation. They are very in tune to the elderly in a way that's most unique. They also, and now I'm going to go back and I could just do the traditionalist talk again. The role of the individual has reduced, and the role of institutions is stronger and stronger and stronger. This group has a new definition of things, and I'll show a couple examples, but when you say the word family to them, it has lots of different definitions for them. So they're much more open-minded, and there's just a different perceptual view of the world, but at the same time, they're extremely traditional. They believe in marriage, they believe in family, they believe in church, they believe in monogamy. They will form institutions, but they will be different. They will be different than the traditionalists, but they are already forming. They love social entrepreneurship. And you'll see it in what emerges. Their use of technology became very different. It's now it was phones are multidimensional and interactive, and they do all kinds of things. And storage is not confined by any hardware, it's in the cloud. It's unlimited. The Z's, when you started using social media, were the most transparent. You guys are the ones that built Facebook, but very transparent. The Millennials used Facebook as a hub and started gaining a little bit more reticence. Z's were transparent. Millennials would say they were oversharing and drama, way too much drama. Millennials backed off a little and started using it as a interactive hub connecting tool. Z's, they can't break away from it totally, although 25% of millennials and Z's have left Facebook. They can't break from it totally because it still is a connectedness hub. But it's lost all its cool factor. And what Z's value the most is not, millennials started really watching their privacy and security settings. Z's don't pay attention to that as much. They want complete anonymity. So what evolved for them is, I don't know what else to call it, but almost destructive communication. It's the, you text a message and then it vanishes into thin air after you've done it. It's the no permanent record, which isn't really true, but they really believe that there is no permanent record because it vanished off their screen. But so Snapchat, Whisper, Yik Yak, these are all something that they highly value and use because of the anonymity. But with that came some of the stressors of bullying. They don't create playlists anymore in the same way that millennials thought of a playlist that I carry with me wherever. No, they live stream. So playlists can change continually, and I can find this new group that's in a garage in Seattle and make them enormously popular and love them and never pay a dime for any of their music. And so their concept of it's turning the corporate world on their head, trying to figure out. But this group has so much discretionary money. So if you take the millennials and the Z's, all of a sudden, corporate, marketing, branding, consumer world, zoom, right into them. Because they have billions in spendable money. In addition, they are the kids of the hyper-aware parents who are giving them a ton of buying influence in the home. And consequently, so corporate America is focusing on the millennials and the Zs at a super high level. Boomers are not real happy about that. But their stress is that they assume the problems of the world. They take those on. And in this generation, starting with the millennials in here, females have surpassed males in academic achievement. This isn't as good. If this was a big hall with a screen, you'd see it better. But it basically talks about three things, and I'll roughly tell you. This right here lays out how teens interact on a daily basis. And so it really shows that they've moved away from the face-to-face. They moved away from formal and that quick texting, and the gathering of information is in quick bites, really quick bites. We call it the snack information. That's how they grab information, is in little chewable bites all over the place. And previous generations always look at these things and say, oh, it's so bad. But there's pros and cons. The truth is that millennials and Zs are both able to process massive amounts of information really fast. Their ability to take information and process it at a speed is evolving, and it's fast. And their ability to take that information, what they have, and apply it to complex problems. So their brains are real agile. They don't just sit there and do physical therapy on their good parts. They're agile brains and they can handle complex problems, but their attention spans are lower. They're absolutely lower attention span. It is really hard to capture their attention, and once you do, holding it is even harder. Ask any teacher of today. But that's also partly, so you'll get a lot of teachers that will complain. Education will complain, oh, the students of today, and this is the problem, and I feel more like an entertainer than a teacher. Well, that is about the stressor between institution and the evolution of generations. And that's my life work, is helping. But this is very important to understand, this evolution, and how that is. Self-awareness, situational awareness, not strong. Not strong with the extras. That's part of it. They can't give a verbal direction. That's what's, they're very visual. The millennials don't understand previous generations because they think they're very inefficient. We have too many meetings, we have too many face-to-faces, and email, oh my God. How can you possibly expect them to communicate the way you do when they can't even bother to spell out a word, OMG? The Zs are at a whole nother level. They do visual. It's emoji. It's subtext. They use pictures. And parents, I'm going to tell you, if you pick up their phone and look at some of their messages and the emojis there, don't guarantee that you know what it means. Because they have the subtext. And they've created with their friends, and their pictures mean all kinds of things. And so it's like they're spies. Little coded messages all over the place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a hard time to be a parent. The world's gotten dangerous and secretive and anonymous. They influence household purchases. The other thing, though, is that this generation wants to dive into the work world as fast as they can. The Zs are looking for professional experiences in high school. They can't wait to get out there and take on this world and fix their problems. But meanings change. And so I'm going to talk now about what it all means. How do you parent? How do you interact with these generations? You have to step back. You have to understand your generation and what it means to how you view the world. But you also have to understand the differences. The word diversity is one that I use as an example. When you said diversity to the traditionalists, they're Ellis Island. It's about the French neighborhood and the German neighborhood and the Irish neighborhood. And I can tell you in my neighborhood which was the German church and which was the Irish church. That was the idea of diversity. When you say diversity to boomers, it's black and white. It's the rise, it's the racial tension between the black America and the white America. When you say diversity to Zs, or to Xers, they see races, all the different ethnicities, all the different skin colors. That's diversity. When you say diversity to millennials, they go global. It's a geographic, it's the entire world, diversity is all the countries in the world. When you say diversity to Zs, they go above skin color and race and geography, and they go right to whole person. It's thinking styles, it's personality type, it's nationality, it's culture, it's gender, it's physical abilities. It's everything. They're up here looking at humanity. We need to embrace that. I mean, think about that. If you get everybody in the room, their perspectives are not wrong, there's value to it, and the evolution of that is a significant thing. Parent strategies. Consider what I just said. They want their own peer group to be viewed as diverse. They want that word diversity to be a meaningful thing in their life. Painful as it is, think about bringing imagery and visuals into your communication. How do you do that? Okay, we spent our life with education, my husband and I, and the first time I came out of my office at home, and on the counter was a little card with a picture that showed a book. And I just cracked up. He had taken the time to make all these cards, so when he left the house and I didn't know where he was and started walking around going, no, where are you? They said, oh, he went to the library. He's got another one that's got a little shopping cart. He's got another one that shows someone walking. And I just thought, okay, this is a young brain. He's doing the emoji thing with these little cards. I thought that was pretty cute. You have to be creative. Talk as equals. This is really important. They value what you have to say. The youth of today absolutely value what they have to say, but not in a condescending way. You have to be very careful of that. Everybody's got their voice and everybody has value. Now, I could spend a whole nother talk about what's going on in the brain of an adolescent and what their capacity is for offering really meaningful comment, but I think the biggest thing I can tell you about that is that it's not until the late 20s that human beings develop to where we can balance the rational thought with our emotion. And the adolescent brain, the emotion's completely out of control, and conversation can escalate into emotion and irrationality very, very easily. That has nothing to do with generations. This is an unbelievable do-it-yourself generation. Be industrious. Get creative. Get on Etsy. Get on all of those places where they find the whole do-it-yourself world. And help them be do-it-yourself people because they love that. Exhibit continual learning. Be humble. Be humble because that's where they come from. They don't expect to ever stop learning. They embrace learning and their curiosity is huge. And they want to see that in you. The humility of not knowing it all. That whole idea of playlists, think about how you interact with them. Are you able to go through life and apply the concept of choice and playlists to everyday life? Model, this is, the millennials were team, the Zs were collaboration. Be collaborative. Think about what that word means versus team. And then help them be collaborative with others. Because that's a very important value to them. Discuss value. This is something that they really will embrace. They want to talk about the price of things. They want to talk about the quality. Where does quality come into value? They want to talk about practicality and need and all of, I mean, think about online now, have you seen the small home trend? The tiny home trend? This is coming out of these generations that value experiences over possessions. They're very different from the Xers who were supersize me. They value experiences over possessions. Connect through a social cause, but don't tell them what social cause. Sit back, and if you have your little snack bite conversations, don't expect to sit down and have long, meaningful conversations with Millennials or Zs. They're snack bite. Appreciate the time in the car. Cars are great trapping places for conversation, although they've got to pull the stuff out of their ears first. But listen for what they value. I'm going to show you a trick. Acknowledge and build their emerging expertise, because trust me, they're all experts and it's emerging. But here's a fun one. Be intellectual in a playful way. They love little things thrown in. It's going to test your creativity. It's going to test it. But that's what they respond to. And encourage and feed their curiosity. But this is probably, I hope you can remember this one. Take your conversations. If you want to connect with the kids, take your conversations and break them into these quadrants. Technology, news, media, culture, and issues. And do it by ask a question, listen, and then share. But I guarantee you're going to have to do some homework to be ready. To be ready. So I sat down and looked at this, and then I wrote down a few things. So if you were going to talk about issues, where might you connect? Because they're going to be different than what will come into your head because of the generational differences. They will want to talk about the concept of technology use while driving and what that means. And they might even want to talk about how cars need to change. They will talk about global warming and natural resource protection. The Zs are worried that there will not be enough access to water. No other generation has even concept of water. We're all about oil and air quality. But the Zs are worried about water. Economic disparity. The disillusion of the middle class. The wide gap between the haves and the have-nots. And some of the extreme poverty in the world. These are things that the Millennials and the Zs will talk about. Civil rights, and it's a different civil rights from the boomers. A very different conversation. Physical and mental health. The Zs aren't really very physical. When they think of sport, here's what's really changed. They're not active. And when Zs think of sport, it's in order to be healthy. It's not in order to have fun. Millennials still balance the two and can be a little obsessive. But Zs, it's really changed. And so talking about that is an area. When you think about media and culture, get yourself informed and talk with them about the evolution of Star Wars. Do you know about the Broadway hit Hamilton? And can you talk to them about what it's doing to the nature of musicals and Broadway and music forever? Go home and Google it. Hamilton is amazing. If you want tickets to it right now, think of 3 years from now. It's big. It's really big. What artists of today will stand the test of time? That is a great question. And then talk about what it means to be the test of time as an artist. In technology, they're going to talk about wearables. They're going to talk about 3D printing and what it means. Do you know that there's hospitals in this country right now that are giving women in labor virtual reality glasses so that while they're in labor, they can be sailing in the Caribbean? I'm all for this. Because your brain is an amazing thing. And so when you talk about 3D technology in printing, when you talk about computers, they are 4D. And that is 360, multi-sensoral, and they get it. And virtual reality is coming. Self-driving cars. And what is the role of mass transit? These are all things you can talk about them. If you want to talk about issues or news, a good one right now, where you might actually know more than they, because I'm going to tell you big things happen in this world, and sometimes the kids have no idea. Sometimes they really are a little clueless about current events that hit the news big because they go other places online. But one would be the Olympics in Brazil and the impact of disease and pollution. That would be of interest to them. But how aware are they? Don't know. This is the way to look at these quadrants and do it with short bites. And if you know more and it opens conversation by the ask question and listen, I guarantee you their curiosity will be piqued. There's a lot of resources. I could have talked for much, much longer. I hit as much as I could. I barely looked at my notes because there's just so much to be said on all of this. There are a lot of resources if you're interested. William Strauss and Neil Howe were the original real deep researchers on this, and they wrote multiple books starting back in the late 1990s. But their most recent ones I've put on Millennials Rising and Millennials Go to College. They're there, but even if you just Google them, you'll find things. Sparks and Honey is a research group that has a pretty cool slide share. So if you want to go through slides, I think it's like 50 slides all about the Z generation. It's pretty cool. And Minnesota, that particular website is about the impact of the generations in Minnesota trends. The M Factor, How Millennial Generation is Rocking the Workplace. This is Lynn Lancaster and David Stillman. They both are big speakers, consultant kind of thing. But Lynn Lancaster actually taught as an adjunct professor at the Humphrey Institute for a while, Minnesota. But they wrote a book years ago called When Generations Collide. And it's a lot about, when I talked about that emergent in the workplace, it still is a book of relevance. There's some tables in there. That book is worthy of checking out. But then they took it further in Millennial Generation Rocking the Workplace. But they have not done anything with Z's yet. Finally, I'll do a little self-promotion in a sideways kind of way. This is what I believe. I believe that the job of youth is to get skilled and educated. That's their job. I believe that student engagement is imperative to learning. They have to be connected. And it doesn't matter how many programs you set up or how much money you throw at anything. Unless you achieve an engaged student, nothing is going to happen with achievement. I believe that no matter who or what perspective they take, the future of family and society and our great country is about the youth. It's about this young generation that has already assumed the responsibility of fixing the problems of our planet, that we really focus on providing the greatest foundation we can. It's about modifying the institutions of education to accommodate not only their current view, their current perspective, but that of the future. And that is what I'm dedicating my life to, and technology is a big, big part of it. So I am working very hard to take all of my experience and all of my expertise and develop technology that allows teachers to lay out a roadmap for students, facilitate that self-directed learning, because the mantra of the future is going to be personal responsibility and accountability. Opposite of entitlement. Personal, you just watch. That is going to be the big next words. Personal responsibility and accountability. Already your kids will talk about the clash in schools between the achievers and the slackers. personal, responsible, and accountability, they get this. They grab it. And based on their own philosophy and guidance and personality and all those things, they create their playlist for the world and their choices. And then their curiosity and their information processing and all that they are. And they get out there and make it happen. But they have to be engaged, it has to be purposeful, and it has to be collaborative. All of those things together. And so teachers have to change. We've talked for years in education about moving from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. But in reality, there are not systems in place to allow a teacher to do that. And there are mechanisms perceptual mechanisms that keep that from happening as well. That requires a big letting go thing too. And technology is an answer to help create that change so that teachers can focus on laying that roadmap and then responding much like a physician to the cognitive needs of each child, to monitor progress and to set up an environment of reward. And with that, I set my company. We have developed 3 products. I am currently in the process of moving to a national rollout and seeking a deep pocket investor for the final product build as well as the national sales and marketing. On that target, what I've done as a CEO in an entrepreneurial world, which trust me, I'm learning every single day. This is not, God, I didn't know I got put on this earth for this, but it happened. I keep forming advisory committees around me to help me because I am very limited in my expertise, and if I limit to just me, I will fail. It takes a village and it takes champions. And right now, the advisory committee that I'm working on is to set up one that's around networking, because this is high-level networking I need to do. And aside from how I appear, I'm a little bit of an introvert. And so learning to network and do it at that level and be confident in that arena, I need an advisory committee. I strongly believe because I'm in technology, to elevate women in not only my workplace, but in my advisory. And if any of you are interested in the future of education, if you have a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, and it just intrigues you a bit, and you'd like to be a part of that advisory group with me, don't hesitate to reach out. There's some cool women that you'll connect with, I guarantee you. Yeah, I have my Successful Men Billionaire Advisory Group over here, and they give me all kinds of different advice. One of them said, get out of Minnesota. I'm going to politely refuse that one. But I appreciate you having me here today. I hope that you gained 1 or 2 tidbits. This was enjoyable for me. I dove deeper into disease because of all of you, and I think that makes me a better person in my world as well. That's great.